Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for the Saving Lives Through Transport webinar. I'm Colleen Harrington and I'm the Waystation Program Director at St. Hubert's Animal Welfare Center, New Jersey, and I'm joined by my colleague Tessa Yu, who is the Transport and Rescue Manager at Humane Rescue Alliance in DC. So Tessa's going to get us started.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us today. I just wanted to start out by introducing myself again, say I'm the Transport and Rescue Manager at the Humane Rescue Alliance. I do have a bit of a background at HRA. I've been there since 2018, started out as Animal Care Supervisor and recently changed to Transport Manager. It is a lot of information to be taking in right now and learning the ropes of this new position, so bear with me through this, but definitely, as we'll discuss later on in the webinar, it's an interesting time for everyone right now due to the circumstances of COVID. So we'll touch on that a little bit later and how that has affected the transport kind of nature of it in animal welfare. So this is just a slide letting you guys know where you can access this webinar and where it will be recorded and saved. So pretty much first off, why do we have transport and rescue as a kind of sector of animal welfare? And honestly, this question is a really important and prevalent one because even with the welfare workers that I work with at HRA, there's a lot of people who don't understand, why are we bringing in animals, shelters? I thought we were supposed to be clearing the shelters and moving animals out. So, transport benefits both the animals and the organizations. You're saving the lives of animals by, kind of rooting back to the principles of animal welfare and increasing live release rates of the animals that we have, and in turn, putting animals in homes, reducing homelessness, and creating kind of a safety net across the country by developing these kinds of collaborations with other organizations. Understanding that you have to develop a symbiosis between animal welfare agencies that are overflowing. Meanwhile, there are agencies that are running dry with animals. So, when you're trying to develop your transport program, it's important to ask, what does your community need? Do you have a high demand for animals from the community and a low supply of animals, or vice versa? Do you have a high supply of animals and low demand? And that'll kind of determine where you want to go with your transport program. Other than that, transport really develops a feeling of collective responsibility between organizations, knowing that by supporting each other, supporting the organizations around you and nationwide and internationally, you're helping to assist in the overarching goals of animal welfare, which is reducing homelessness, increasing spay and neuter rates, spreading awareness that transport is a resource that people can turn to, and increasing live release rates. So that being said, this is an interesting time right now with COVID-19 affecting the world as a pandemic, because I would say in terms of what we've been doing at HRA and at St. Hubert's, we're reaching out to agencies that particularly are struggling because intake's not slowing down when even there's a virus going around. So, extending yourself and being able to provide yourself as a resource for other organizations as well is really important. So other than that, as that very long prelude of that, we're going to also get into talking about our specific transport processes, how to start your own, and transporting during COVID times, and then we'll finalize with a Q&A. But moving on from that, so I touched on a lot of this in the first slide, pretty much. Why do we transport? Saving lives, encouraging adoptions. One of the most interesting things I think that I've learned since taking on this job is that, by bringing in and filling up your shelter, at least from our perspective, when we are running low on, when we're very good on space, but we don't have a lot of animals, bringing in animals and getting that kind of diversity in our shelter brings in people and brings in potential adopters and helps them see the populations that we have, that they're very diverse, and it's not just, it's not just pit bulls, it's not just like these plain brown tabbies, but sometimes we have these fancy ones too. But not only getting them to adopt the fancy ones, but also bringing them in and getting them interested because of that, and then them seeing the dog next door and being like, oh hey, like maybe this dog would be a better fit. So getting adoptions in is not just having them adopt out the super fancy ones, but just getting people in. addressing the animal population disparity, of course, determining whether your shelter is overrun with animals or, like I said, running dry with animals, and seeing what you need. One of the most interesting things that I think animal welfare faces is, the geographical effects of what, various animal populations are throughout at least the United States, where, organizations up north are pulling from in the deep south, but there are different communities in the south, like Florida in the southeast United States, that are also running dry in their shelters, and they have to go up to New England and pull animals when their communities right next door and right over the borders have these animals that they're shipping up north. So, understanding how this population flow affects different organizations and kind of being able to help with that is really important. And we'll touch on a little bit later how your organization can help differently besides just being a destination/source organization, but also, a hub, a way station, and we'll get into that. Freeing up space and resources, definitely important. Meeting supply and demand, like I said, and creating that collective responsibility. So I just thought that this map was really cool. I went on Pet Point and just kind of pulled up this transfer network kind of overview of what this is. And this is just a map of organizations that use Pet Point that are transferring in and out animals. And I think this really speaks to the links of how transport can help. At least in North America, this is what this map shows, and how, the green, I believe, is shelters that transfer in and out. Blue is just shelters that transfer out. Yellow is shelters that transfer in exclusively, and gray are shelters that don't transfer yet. But like I said, this is only organizations that use Pet Point, and I think that really says a lot about how much transport can have an effect in a given area, because if all of these organizations work together to support each other and provide these networks for each other, that's such a wide breadth that we can reach, at least throughout the nation. And of course, like, there's even further that you can go. You can go internationally, you can go at least between countries. There's, the sky's the limit with transport, as long as you're able to understand your resources and understand your limits as well. All right, so I wanted to go over some key terminology, just in case you're just delving into animal transport and welfare kind of sphere and don't really understand the terms yet. First off, organization to organization is pretty much the most direct relationship that you're going to have within transport. So that's when one organization, the source organization, will directly work with the destination shelter to work together and figure out transport on their own. In terms of source and destination, a source shelter is where the animal population originates from, and the destination is where they ultimately end up or are transported to. A hub or an aggregator, this is actually a lot of what St. Hubert's does, is providing a central point as a facility for different organizations to kind of meet there and provide, and for them to provide care and provide this facility where these animals can stay and know that this is the stopping point until they can make it to their final destination. In terms of transporters, there's a few different kinds. There's third-party transporters. There's a lot of organizations that just function as animal transporters. They don't really provide they don't provide a source or a destination, but they're very key in providing that transportation need. Volunteer, a lot of organizations such as ours have a very vast volunteer base that you can just reach out to. And I know in my experience, when I've reached out to our volunteers, the emails come flooding in. They say, oh, I just want to help. Like, I'll go all the way to wherever and drive 2 hours to deliver this turtle or whatever. So volunteers are a super huge resource that we have, and that a lot of organizations have as well. Multi-source transporters, this one is a little different. So sometimes a transporter will visit multiple different sources before ending up at their final destination, kind of to expedite the process of travel. This one can be a little bit trickier and a little riskier in terms of minimizing disease transmission, because there's multiple points of access where disease can take effect. So that one is a little bit less common, I'd say, but it is still one that can be practiced if done with care. And another form of transportation that can be used is a multi-leg transport, which is similar to multi-source, where different organizations kind of have stopping points and pass off the animals. This is less so for larger transports, but it does also exist. And finally, a Waystation is kind of used as a rest stop for animals, and St. Hubert's practices this as well, kind of for both the humans and the animals as a rest stop for long distance transport. Sometimes people are traveling for quite some time, so providing this is really ideal for people who just need a break from driving. All right, so in determining what you can develop out of your transport program, you really want to find out your 4 W's, which is your who, what, where, and why. So for who, you have to decide what organizations are realistic for you as a partner. And this goes back to understanding what your community needs in terms of supply and demand. Some short source shelters have a really good TNR program, for example, and don't really have a lot of cats, but have a lot of dogs. Vice versa. Some organizations have good outlets for dog placement, but have a tougher time placing cats or kittens, especially during kitten season, for example. So understanding that dynamic. So understanding what your organization needs and also what other organizations need. And this can be like what I just said in terms of populations, but it can also be like what you need in terms of veterinary care or in terms of transportation support. So determining those kinds of outlets and resources that you have. Where, this is also a really important one too, deciding what is a feasible geographical region for your organization. And obviously starting out, it might be a little more difficult saying, I want to transport some dogs in from Russia, but starting out small, seeing what kind of, like I said, resources that you have, what kind of transportation that you have, how you want to develop further on locally, nationally, internationally, that kind of thing. And also determining what kind of travel restrictions there are. Interstate travel can get a little bit tricky, so keeping that in mind, because that can sometimes pose a little bit of a barrier, which we will talk about more later. And then why are you transporting? Understanding, is it for space, clearing out space in a different shelter? Is it for a medical reason? And if so, understanding the limits to your transportation capacity as well. If you're transporting for a medical reason, obviously you're not going to bring a large load of animals in. If you're transporting for space, knowing if you have enough space in your vehicle, or if you even have a vehicle to make that kind of a large transport, because obviously there are costs to transports, and you're going to want to weigh those costs as well. Cool. Alrighty, so this is a nice little, what is it called? Timeline, I guess you could call it. Just understanding what kind of tools that you need and what you need to understand to develop your transport programs. You want to know what kind of capacity you have for transport. You want to make sure that regardless if it's the source or destination shelter, that you have adequate housing facilities for population management. So, making sure that you have care staff that'll be able to appropriately take care of the animals, making sure that you have kennels to accommodate the animals that you're bringing in, because you're not going to want to put yourself in a pressure situation in order to accommodate these populations. Understanding that you need access to professional veterinary oversight. So whether that's for health certificates, which require veterinary inspections, or if you're transferring in an animal who's showing some URI signs and might need some antibiotics, you need to be able to have that resource accessible to you in case anything pops up. So understanding best and above and beyond practice for sanitation, disinfection. So this one actually resonates a lot with me because of my background in animal care. So it is so easy for things to break out in shelters, and even more so when you're moving animals on transport and putting them so close together in vicinity. And moving them to a totally different place and population. So, being able to know how to properly disinfect things and minimize disease transmission is really key. And finally, understanding supply and demand, like I've discussed before, just knowing what your population needs, what your population doesn't need, weighing the risks of transporting in, and all that. All right, so humane transport. So at the end of the day, we're animal welfare workers, and the welfare of our shelter animals is really the top priority. So all animals can get stressed out from transport, so it's important to be able to remember how to minimize that stress, whether it's physical stress, mental stress, anything like that. So all animals have their 5 freedoms, which are freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from pain, freedom from inhibition of their normal animal behaviors, freedom from discomfort, and freedom of fear. So all these things you're going to want to keep in mind when you're transporting your animals and getting ready for their transport. Doesn't matter if the trip is 1 hour or 14 hours, you need to make sure that these animals are going to be comfortable for their travels, and understanding what kind of space limitations that you have, what kind of barriers that you have, so that animals aren't in direct line of sight of each other. Making sure that the vehicle's climate controlled and sound controlled so that it's not overly stressful. Ensuring that the conditions are spacious enough that they have access, at least as much access as you can, to water, and especially specifying, individualizing the care that you're giving to the animals per the populations that you have. So, if you have puppies, they're going to have a little bit higher needs than if you're transporting a larger dog, or if you have a kitten who's young and you need to make sure that it has food through its travels. That's something that you have to keep in mind as well. So a lot of the necessities that you're going to want to remember are just basic things, making sure that you have good ventilation, good air quality in the vehicle, adequate space in their carriers, making sure that the crates and kennels that you have are spacious enough for the animals that you're transporting. No sharp edges, absorbent bedding in case they have any accidents, stable floors that aren't going to cause damage or creak around while the vehicle's moving, and heating and cooling, like I mentioned. Cool. So basically, when you're creating your transport program, there's lots of responsibilities that you're going to want to keep in mind. This is a lot of semantics, but it is stuff that all transport programs have to follow in the United States. So public health and safety are the primary concern, whether that's for humans or animals. So especially, which Colleen will talk about later, during the COVID times, understanding how you're going to minimize that human contact, but also, of course, minimizing disease transmission through animals, and making sure that they're all safe and contained and secure during transport is really important. All transport agencies must be a 501c3 agency or a municipal agency, so making sure that your organization can accommodate, it can meet that. So abiding by local, state, and federal regulations, like we mentioned, with health certificates and interstate travel, keeping that in mind is really important, because you can get in a bit of trouble if you don't follow that, and you're caught. So, and then humane standards of care must be afforded to all animals being transported, whether that's on the vehicle, when you get to the destination, prior to the destination, all animals must be housed in comfortable conditions. All right, so a little bit of differences between the responsibilities of source and destination shelters. So it's really important between the two to develop kind of a good communicative working relationship in order to understand who is going to take care of what, and just kind of developing a memorandum of understanding between working organizations. And we'll include that on the webpage of this webinar. It's going to be posted on as a little template, but just kind of developing an understanding between source and destination, and understanding the roles that you each have. And also kind of ties into establishing an understanding of medical versus behavioral versus transportation needs. For example, at HRA, I know that, and at St. Hubert's, we have a certain degree of vetting that an animal needs before it gets transported. So making sure that the source shelter is upholding that side. Understanding what temperaments of the animals that you're pulling in. I mean, if a shelter says that, a cat has a good temperament and it shows up and it is against swatting at everyone, understanding that, but also knowing that mistakes can happen. The transport can change a little bit of that, but having a kind of foundation for what kind of animals you're bringing in, and also, of course, understanding who's going to be transporting and what kind of needs you need for transportation, whether they need help meeting in the middle for transport, whether they need some extra time to transport, which kind of ties into the last bullet on this, which is maintaining a level of flexibility. A lot of the times transport can be very unpredictable. As I'm sure Colleen can attest, there's a lot of things that can pop up just while you're on the road, before, after, anything like that. So being able to be flexible and adaptable is super important. So other than that, formulating a method to transfer medical records is something that source and destination shelters have to work out to be able to adequately transfer that between shelters. So including vaccination history, rabies tags, health certificates, having a very clear understanding who's gonna, how you're gonna take care of it, whether it's gonna be electronic, whether it's gonna be a physical pass off, anything like that. So also understanding where both agencies stand in terms of potential returns. So it's important to be able to open that line of communication, whether an animal's not working out at its destination, and seeing if the source shelter would be willing to take back or anything is an important understanding to develop prior to transport. And of course, determining main mode of transportation and ensuring safe, sanitary, and humane travel conditions is the responsibilities of both agencies. All right, so now I'm going to pass it off to Colleen.
Thank you, Tessa. That was great. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of our Waystation Transport program, and then I'll talk a little bit about how and why we're able to continue transporting during this COVID crisis. So St. Hubert's Waystation program, we operate on the hub and spoke transport model. We've built a network of partners that we work together to transfer dogs from areas of need to areas of opportunity, while also offering a hands-up approach to our partners. So as I mentioned, we have a network of 80 partners. You'll see on the map, those purple dots are our sending partners, and then they come up to us there in the middle, and those blue dots are our receiving partners. Since we started the program in August 2016, we've been able to transfer over 14,000 dogs and puppies. We've given back over $350,000 for public spay-neuter in the communities where the dogs come from. We've awarded 20 shelter partners with scholarships to attend HSUS Animal Care Expo. And we've also done on-site trainings in South Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, Georgia, Puerto Rico, and Mississippi. So the way our Waystation program works is we have one set of medical protocols for all of our partners, and we have one behavior screening for all of our partners. We have memorandums of understanding with both our source partners and our destination partners. Waystation handles all the coordination of transports, and we also cover the bulk of the transport costs. The give back funds for public spay-neuter in the source communities is handled by all destination partners, so all of them contribute, and that's at $25 per dog. And the Waystation also contributes $20 per dog to cover some medical expenses for preparatory for transport. So all the animals receive health certificates to St. Hubert's. Once they get to us, our vet does a secondary check And we do anything extra that we need to meet the specific needs of the receiving organization or the state that the dog is going to. And then we reissue the house certificate onto the destination partner. So older, larger, and special needs dogs are standard operating protocol for us. All of our transports have a variety of sizes and ages. We don't transport just smalls and puppies because we know that while these are the easiest for us to adopt out, this isn't what our partners need the most help. So our hands-up approach, this is really the hallmark of our Waystation Transport program. It's imperative for destination partners to really help the receiving shelters. So if you're only transporting dogs, you're really just not doing enough. Our sending partner colleagues are they're in the trenches, they're working really hard, they have very little resources, and it's our collective responsibility to help them out. So our hands-up approach includes the funds for public spay-neuter in their communities, the funds for medical prep. We do physical resources like enrichment and training kits, donations of food, cages, equipment, and supplies. We provide connections to vendors, funders, and opportunities, and we do on-site training and mentorship. And as I mentioned, we award expo scholarships and other educational opportunities. So as Tessa was talking about, the most important component of a good transfer partnership is communication and really just laying the foundation for medical protocols, behavior protocols, and memorandums of understanding. So I'm going to give you an example of the protocols that we use for our Waystation program. And then the links to these will be put up on the website so you can look at them, and you can even, if you want to, use them and customize them to your program. So the first element is our medical protocol, and this is super important. You want to be really clear about what type of vaccinations, testing, and preventatives that you require or that you can offer. We like to keep our protocol really simple. It's one page, it's easy to read, and we use it as an appendix to our MOU. The next thing is behavior assessments. I know a lot of organizations have moved away from using formal assessments in the shelter, and I understand that, but we feel for transport, we need some sort of benchmark, so we're sure that we're transporting safe and adoptable dogs, so we use this assessment, which is really easy to use. And the next element is our memorandums of understanding. So this document is super important also because it lays out the expectations of the partnership. It's mutually agreed upon by both parties, and it clearly states the roles and responsibilities for each party. So we have one for both our source partner and our destination partner. And again, we'll put the links up for those if you guys want to take a look and use whatever you want from this, feel free. So transporting during COVID. So, like many of you, we were here trucking along doing our thing, which for me was managing the transport of 300 to 400 dogs each month. We had all of our transports scheduled, we had all of our partners scheduled, and then COVID happened and turned everything upside down. So I want to explain to you what we did as an organization and how we were able, to continue transports. So the first thing we did when COVID hit was we did a major adoption foster push. We wanted to move out as many animals as possible in case there was like a huge spike in local intake or if we had any staffing issues. For local intake, we didn't really need to reduce our local intake because it was already so low. We shift to virtual and appointment-based adoptions. We split our staff teams so we could keep everybody safe and limit the number of people in the building. This was really easy to do because most of our animals went right to adoption and foster. We encouraged our community to have a pet preparedness plan. So if anything were to happen to them, they had a plan for their pet. We did community program support. We had a drive-through pet pantry in our parking lot for the community. And we also created a regional shelter toolkit, which included the pet plan, podcasts with national animal welfare leaders, and also the webinars. So our early actions really resulted in like a ton of capacity by way of empty kennels, and we also had a waiting list of adopters and fosters with not enough animals to fulfill those requests. So we knew that we could continue transports. So the next thing I did was I reached out to our Waystation partners to see what the need was. So most of our destination partners experienced the same results we did. They had lots of empty kennels because all the animals went up to adopters and fosters. However, many of them still had to hit the pause button on transports because most of them because of state guidelines, but a lot just because that was an organizational decision. For our source partners, unfortunately, success was not uniform. Some of them were able to limit intake and send animals out to adoption and foster, while others lost their adoption outlet because they were close to the public and their intake just continued. So we knew that there was definitely still the need for transport. So we were able to take in the animals and there was the need, so we decided to do the transports. So we wanted to see how else we could support our partners. So obviously continuing the transports, we did that. And then we just did frequent check-ins with our partners. Things were changing so fast every day. So we really just kept the lines of communication open and just checked in to see how they were doing and what they needed. We shared our foster program and surrender prevention materials. Some of our partners were utilizing foster homes for the very first time. So rather than them recreate foster applications and contracts, we just shared our documents, and that way they can move the animals really quickly into foster homes without having to, make up those documents. We pointed them to grant opportunities and offered our assistance in filling those out. And then we did specific programs. Like, one of the most important things I think that we do with our program is that we meet our partners where they are. So we don't tell them what they should be doing or what they need to do. We ask them what they need help with. So during one of our regular check-ins, one of our partners in Louisiana said, hey, we're closed to the public and we have all this downtime and we really want to ramp up our behavior modification program. And they had a little dog with resource guarding. So myself and our director of behavior and training and their shelter staff and Blueberry the dog all hopped on a Zoom call, and we were able to talk them through doing some behavior modification protocols. And it was super fun, and it was a success because I think Blueberry's since been adopted. And we also offered food and supply donations. So anytime a partner transported dogs to us, we were able to fill their vehicle with food and supplies that they can bring back to their shelter in their community. So if you're asking yourself, can you still transport or should you start a transport program? The answer is probably yes. So first you want to confirm with your state that you are allowed to still transport. There's been lots of different state executive orders that are constantly getting amended and then released. So definitely check with the state to make sure that you're allowed. And the website is there if you want to find out the contact for your state vet to ask them that. You want to be sure that you have the adoption and foster demand to bring in animals. You want to make sure that you have the capacity for care. You want to make sure that you have enough kennels or foster homes and staff to care for the animals you're bringing in. You want to check in with your partners and make sure that they actually need transport. So we definitely had some partners, some sending partners that didn't need us at this time because they were able to lower their intake. So check in with your partners, make sure they need it. And if they don't, reach out to new partners, and include all of those new protocols, the MOUs, the medical protocols, all of that, and communicate. And definitely help local first. There may be shelters right down the road from you that aren't experiencing the same level of success as you are. And they need the help, and they're right down the road. So please reach out to them first. Oh, and most importantly, be ready to implement COVID-19 safety protocols in your transports. So American Pets Alive has really great resources on all things COVID, and they also have great resources on COVID-19 transport protocols, which I use. There's a lot when I created ours. So the first thing we want to do is keep the lines of communication open like we do with everything with our partners. We're really good at managing animal disease, so we just sort of have to make the shift to also protect the people now also. So you want to keep the lines of communication open with your shelter partners. Make sure that if any staff or volunteers have been ill with COVID or exposed to COVID, that we communicate that to each other so we know. We also, again, want to check state executive orders and travel restrictions. And then you want to be sure to include CDC guidelines to limit the risk of transmission of COVID on all steps of the transport process. So that includes animal prep, loading, unloading, medical checks, paperwork, etc. So all staff should be wearing face masks, social distancing, washing their hands, and just properly sanitizing all surfaces all the time. You also want to be sure to only have essential staff at the transports. I know generally when a transport vehicle pulls into our parking lot, all of our staff run out and they want to get the dogs off the truck. But during this time, we really try to limit the number of staff to only the bare minimum. Paperwork, so anything that can be sent electronically should be sent electronically. The less you have to touch paperwork, the better. Crate sanitation, this is pretty standard before COVID, but after each transport, all crates should be taken off and completely cleaned and sanitized. It's a good idea to also wipe down vehicle door handles, gas tanks, steering wheels, and all that stuff. So we have a couple videos of how we've been able to transport during the COVID epidemic, and they're going to start now. Hi everyone, we're here for transport with 31 dogs coming from South Carolina. We're going to show you how to unload a transport following COVID protocols. So for the puppies, they need to be covered in puppy pads. So our staff is going in, getting the puppies out of the crates themselves, staying 6 feet apart from the transporters. Look at these cuties. Oh my goodness. And these puppies already have adoption appointments, so they will be in homes very shortly. Good morning. We are live at the unload of a transport from South Carolina. I'm going to show you how to unload a transport following COVID protocols. So you'll see the transporter holds a leash, 6 feet low. Our staff grabs at the collar and brings them in. Hi, Scorpio. Welcome to Jersey. So I just want to point out, usually, the staff would all be lined up and the transporter would just be handing us dogs and handing off puppies. But because we want to stay 6 feet apart, that's why Lynn went on and got the puppies out herself. Andrew stayed at least 6 feet away from the transporter handing off the dogs. We're all wearing gloves, and I know that's not the best protocol for COVID, but we're sure not to touch anything else with the gloves, and we are actually disposing our gloves into the trash cans. So that's how that works. So hey everybody, we're here on day 2 showing you how to do a transport under COVID protocols. Yesterday we had 31 dogs come in from South Carolina. They spent the night with us, got to rest off the truck, and our vet got to check them out. And now they're heading out to our receiving partner. First dog is Sabrina. Come on, baby. Come on. So you'll notice we're working with limited staff. We usually have 7 or 8 staff out here loading the dogs. Right now we have 2 that are staying 6 feet apart. Everybody is wearing gloves and masks, and remember, gloves are only helpful if you don't touch anything else. So Andrew loaded his dog. He's now going to wipe down the handle that he just touched, because when he gets to our receiving partner, they're going to unload their own dogs. So there'll be no handing off of dogs. Everybody uses their own leash and gets their own dogs out. Okay, so now I guess we're going to have some frequently asked questions that we've been getting from some partners. And the first one is, what are the benefits of a successful transport program? Tessa, what do you think the benefits of a successful transport program are?
Sure. So like we already talked about earlier on in the segment, there are a lot of benefits to having a transport program, both for the shelter and the destination shelter. Just in general, of course, meeting the community supply and demand, like we discussed, that kind of animal population thing, but also developing that sense of collaboration between organizations is really important, and kind of forming that foundation for further support for each other is really important in just animal welfare kind of overall perspective, because of course, as much as everyone knows, like, it is a difficult time right now, and of course this is the time that organizations should be supporting each other. So providing that outreach so that agencies don't have to feel like they're backed into a corner and don't know what to do if they're really tight on space, or just need some sort of outlet. The resource sharing part is also an important aspect of having a transport program too, so that a lot of times when high volume shelters have too many animals, they are expending all this time and people, energy, labor, you know, and expenses just taking care of these animals. So being able to kind of share that, even if a shelter isn't overflowing in population, you know, still providing that resource for people and kind of developing, like I said, the sense of collaboration is really important. And also one other thing that I want to know about the benefits is, you know, setting an infrastructure for regular transport, and also for disaster planning too, because having a reliable way to transport animals and knowing what works for your organization and what doesn't work is really important. So, you know, developing that and kind of systematizing that in advance so that in the future, if emergency situations do arise, you already have that knowledge accessible to you. Anything else to add, Colleen?
Yeah, I was, when you were talking, I was thinking in my head, so it does really build an infrastructure. Like even if we transport our way out of overpopulation, there's always going to be hurricanes and there's always going to be hoarders, right? So when there was all the hurricanes, we were the hub for a lot of incoming transports, and just having our network of partners, it was so easy for us to say yes to incoming transports because they were all willing to jump in and help. And even our source partners were like, we can help by taking one or two, you know, like everybody wanted to help. So it was just great having that network of partners.
Absolutely. All right. So next question, what are the costs of transport? Do you want to take the lead on this one, Colleen?
So I'm not sure if they're asking like the actual monetary costs or what else it could be. You know, costs vary on what kind of transport you're doing. If you're doing a volunteer transport, obviously the costs are minimal. The paid transporters are a little bit more expensive, or you could be doing your own transport. As far as like emotional costs, I think that, you know, if you do it right, there really isn't any emotional cost to the animals, and it's only a benefit to the people that are involved. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think you're totally right. I mean, the typical financial costs of transport, you know, are always going to exist. The labor costs, food accommodation costs, vehicle maintenance is something that your organization is going to have to see what you can accommodate and afford, of course. But also, you know, like Colleen said, if you are doing your transport program right, there are plenty of benefits, and, you know, hopefully those benefits would outweigh the costs. A few things that I would say, particularly during COVID times right now, is people might wonder if it might be costly, I guess, to continue transporting during a pandemic time like this. But like Colleen already discussed, if you are following proper safety protocols, you know, protecting yourself, protecting the people around you, then it should be something that's manageable for your organization. All right. How does my shelter determine what transport model to follow, and how do we determine what we are equipped to follow? Want to start off? You want me to kick this one off?
I think you covered this really well in the beginning of the webinar. You really just have to look at your capacity and, you know, all those things. And I feel like even if you're an organization that maybe you're like, well, I want to transfer, but I want to start off slow, you can reach out to neighboring shelters that you work with and see if they're transporting, and possibly get in on sharing a transport. And that way you share the cost, you share the benefits of receiving animals, and you can start out slow and see how it works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. All right. And how can the transporting shelter make travel as low stress as possible? So we were joking about this earlier, whether it's low stress for humans or low stress for animals. Of course, like we discussed earlier in the webinar, in order to provide an animal with as comfortable and humane mode of transportation as possible, it's important to adhere to, you know, proper housing, making sure that it's sanitary, that it's comfortable, that there's no harm being posed to the animal in its when it's being transported. But I mean, I guess low stress for humans, you know, I think maintaining that line of communication is also something that could be applicable. I'm sure Colleen could attest to that too. People, you know, making sure that you are on the same page with whether it's your transporter, with the source destination agency, anything like that. Just trying to maintain, you know, a common understanding about what is expected with the animals, what's expected with transport, and what's expected once the animals arrive or are departing, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would just add there's so much that can happen with transport. You just want to have all your ducks in a row from the beginning so that it's less stressful if something comes up.
Definitely. All right.
So
And
how does my shelter or agency begin developing partnerships with other organizations? So I think that's a pretty easy one. Like I said, you hopefully have neighboring shelters that you already work with. So if you're interested in working with them on transports, just talk with them and see if who they're working with. And I bet you that, the partners that they're working with for transport have additional dogs that they would like to send, and you just can't send them all the time. Otherwise, reach out. Just start reaching out in your geographical area, how far you can go, and just communicate what your needs are, what you can do for them, and see if you can make it work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you totally hit the nail on the head. Reaching out to just a vast network, you're bound to hit someone who's going to say, yes, like our shelter philosophy is aligned with yours. What we have aligns with what you can provide, and just finding that, I'm sure that there'll be someone out there who will accept the help or want to help you. So just casting that wide net is bound to get some successful results. Thank you so much, guys, for joining.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Tessa.
Thanks, Colleen.